Today it's about fallopian tube, truly invisible organs. They are very important, but they are not visible on ultrasound scan or CT scan or MRI scan. That is very intriguing fact. So we are going to learn 5 important topics on fallopian tube, which I believe will help you have a better life and better tomorrow. Fallopian tube is a very vital gynecological organ which are present in women's lower abdomen, 2 in number, one on right side and another on left side. Before that, there is a quick question. Do you know where the egg and sperm meet and then have a cup of coffee and then return back to the uterus to start a new life? It is called tube. No, it is not a London underground tube. It is known as fallopian tube. We'll get to know what is fallopian tube and how the name was given to fallopian tube. Very interesting history. After a long time, this is a new video on Anatomy with Coffee series. In Anatomy with Coffee series, if you are following it, we'll learn about a lot of things about women's body to make a better tomorrow for women. And if you have got better women, you have got better family and better future. So, to start with its name, how the fallopian tube got this name fallopian tube? Gabriel Falloppio was one of the most important anatomists in 16th century. Well, he was a Catholic priest in church, but at that time, he was known as Fallopius. At that time, everyone had a Latinized name, so Gabriel Falloppio's name was Fallopius. Even though he was a priest, he had keen interest in human body, and apparently, it is thought that he discovered the fallopian tube and brought to modern science. And to commemorate his name, these tubes are named as fallopian tube even till today. What is inside this tube? As I said, fallopian tube is a tube, but let me just make a tube out of this paper. So each side, women have got this tube, this fallopian tube, and it has got 2 ends. One towards the ovary, and suppose this end is the uterus. So from the ovary, the eggs come out every month, and therefore the egg goes into the tube, and then they swim through the tube and go into the uterus to hopefully to start a new life. But not every time the life starts. The egg which travels through the tube, if the pregnancy is not formed, they get washed out through the uterus, down through the vagina and out in the world and gets lost. But the question that intrigues us, how the egg which starts from the ovary and goes to the uterus, how they travel through the tube. Inside of the tube, there are very tiny finger-like projections. They basically glide the egg through the tube into the uterus, and a lot of chemical parameters come into place which helps the egg glide from the ovary into the uterus. Interestingly, at the ovarian end of the tube, there are a lot of finger-like projections, and they actually grab hold of the egg, not like this, but kind of like this. With the chemical parameters and properties, they get the egg and pushes into the tube, and then the egg glides through the tube. The fallopian tube is only 10 centimeters long, and inside, even though there is a lot of space here, but in real life fallopian tube, it can barely accommodate a duck squirrel. So, we were talking about this fallopian tube. So, suppose this is the left side fallopian tube, but here the egg and sperm meet somewhere here. They have got a cup of coffee together and then they glide to the uterus, as I said earlier before. But sometimes the egg and sperm, after they meet and form an embryo, they cannot glide into the uterus. They stay here and start to get bigger and form a new pregnancy. The pregnancy which is supposed to get formed within the uterus, if gets formed within the tube, of course, it will not be a normal pregnancy, will it? It will not get a lot of food that it requires, and which usually it gets within the uterus. Within the tube, they do not get the food. And most importantly, eventually, if the pregnancy starts to get bigger, the fallopian tube eventually pops, and it can cause a lot of bleeding. And this is known as ectopic pregnancy. Our third important point of tube today is about ectopic pregnancy. What is ectopic pregnancy? Ectopic means where this should not be there. So the pregnancy which is supposed to be in the uterus, if it forms within the tube and grows within the tube, that means it is not supposed to be here. So it's called ectopic pregnancy. The ectopic pregnancy is an abnormal pregnancy, and most of the cases it needs to be operated if someone has got ectopic pregnancy. And in many of the cases, the fallopian tube needs to be sacrificed in order to safeguard the woman's life. because ectopic pregnancy can bleed. Uncommonly, ectopic pregnancy can also be treated with some medications to melt the pregnancy within the tube, but it is debatable whether that tube will retain its function of gliding the egg in future. The next point we are going to learn is about infection. There is a very special name if there is infection which grows within the fallopian tube. It is called pelvic inflammatory disease. Pelvic inflammatory disease, or it is commonly known as PID, is not very unusual, and sometimes the infection travels from down below, that is through the vagina, into the uterus, into the tubes, and sometimes it damages the tube. As I said, the tube is a very frail and very sensitive organ. So if it gets infection, sometimes the tube remains damaged. So it is important to understand how women can avoid having infections within the tube. We are going to discuss that towards the end of our discussion of this video, so wait for that. If this fallopian tube does not work, that means it is blocked. It will not be able to make the egg travel. This can cause infertility. So it is part of infertility investigation, and the doctor would want to know, and you, if you are suffering from infertility, you would want to know if your fallopian tubes are working. So there is an interesting way to check if the tubes are working. It's very simple. So from the down below, through the natural passage, a little bit of color is pushed through the uterus. Color means the color which is visible on the X-ray or ultrasound and various other scans. So a little bit of color or dye is pushed through the vagina, through the cervix, into the uterus, and if it spills through the tube into the abdominal cavity, that means the tubes are working. Sometimes one tube is found to be blocked, and sometimes both tubes are found to be blocked. In that situation, it takes a little bit of treatment for infertility. Unfortunately, even if the tubes are open, sometimes the gliding function through which the egg glides into the uterus from the ovary is lost, and there is no way to check if the gliding function is there or not. So sometimes we see, even after the doctors checked the fallopian tube and it is open, the pregnancy doesn't start. So one of these causes could be the gliding function of the fallopian tube is lost, but which is not detectable. After this, we'll be coming to our fifth and last topic about fallopian tube. In normal situations, few years back, I think this would be the end of fallopian tube discussion. But now we have got a very new information which has come through via medical researches. Medical researches have proved the fallopian tube could be a notorious start point of cancer. And it is often said and thought and hypothesized that many of the ovarian cancers actually start from fallopian tube. If you are aware of ovarian cancer, you will know that ovarian cancer is one of the notorious cancer which is difficult to detect at a very early stage. But science is telling that the fallopian tube, the fimbrial end, that is ovarian end of the fallopian tube, is the start point of ovarian cancers, and then they apparently spread from fallopian tube into the ovary, and then we call it a ovarian cancer. If you want to know a little bit more about that in some next videos, we will talk about that. Before we finish, let's discuss how to keep the tubes healthy. Now, something which is invisible through the ultrasound scan, CT scan, MRI, how do you keep it healthy? It is relatively easy. Now, whatever keeps your body healthy will keep the fallopian tubes healthy as well. Good diet and regular exercise can really help you. And needless to say, keeping the number of sexual partners to bare minimum, if possible to one, will be a valuable, important life skill. It is not always true that multiple sexual partners is guaranteed to cause more infections and tube damage, but it is statistically more likely to happen. Another issue is to avoid usage of talcum powder in the private parts, and there are some researches which links the use of talcum powder in the private part with ovarian cancer, that means fallopian tube cancer perhaps. Additionally, some of the vaginal wash solutions that are commonly used nowadays and commonly found in supermarket, there are very many names for that, which claims to give you a better pH or better private health, better genital health and stuff, but your vagina and the human private parts have got their own cleaning mechanism. You do not need an external artificial chemical wash to keep the area healthy, so be aware of that. So that's all today. Let's meet you over some new video on Anatomy with Coffee series. Have a good day, and that's all today.